ready to start with this afternoon's seminar on engaging the community through online evangelistic meetings. And we just want to welcome all of you. I know I've been waiting to hear this particular seminar because I think all of us are interested now on how to be more effective online. And so we are probably going to have a few more of you that are going to be joining as the seminar continues. We're going to have a time for Q&A towards the end, and then some closing remarks from our speakers. But again, we just want to welcome you. And I would like to have a word of prayer before I introduce our speakers to you. If you will just want to bow your heads with me to have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity that we have today of listening to this wonderful seminar that's going to guide us and help us how to be more effective in doing evangelism in our communities through the resources that we now have online. And so, Lord, I ask that you will be with our speakers today, bless them in a powerful way. And Lord, we ask also that you will just bless our time together. In Jesus' name, amen. So everyone, just so that you know, Larry and Vince, they are the founders of SermonView, a company that I've used a few times, and I'm just so happy that they are on the scene and to help us, pastors, be more, be able to connect more with our community. They've been providing, this kind of service for over 20 years, helping churches connect with people in their communities. And over the last 7 years, SermonView has handled over 5,000 evangelism marketing campaigns. That's a lot. So they have a lot of experience under their belt, I know, and they're going to be able to share that with us. One of the things that there is a very useful tool is what they call InterestTracker. It's a free cloud-based tool to track interactions with, between us and seekers. And I believe, if my data is correct, maybe 600 or more churches are using InterestTracker today. And so Vince, Larry, we just want to welcome you, and I know that you're going to be a blessing to all of us as you make your presentation. So Larry, take it away.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to be able to share what God is doing through SermonView. And as was mentioned, SermonView has been around for 15 years. Prior to that, I was at It Is Written Digital Media Group for 4 years. So in another month or so, I'm actually going to be starting my 20th year working with churches in graphics and evangelism. Vince has been with me for almost every one of those years working together. And as he mentioned, we've handled over 5,000 evangelism marketing campaigns in the last 7 years. One of the things that's really important to me as a lifelong Seventh-day Adventist is that when we're talking about evangelism, that we're working in a way that's communicating with people who are not Adventists, who don't have any background in the Adventist message. And so here at SermonView, we have a team of both Seventh-day Adventists and non-Adventists who work with us to bridge that gap, to be able to communicate and translate Adventese into language that is actually recognizable and understood by the broader population. So here at SermonView, we have a team of both Adventists and non-Adventists. So, all right, COVID happens. We definitely are in this crisis. How do we do evangelism? And we spent a lot of time and effort trying to figure out how do we propel evangelism forward in this unique evangelistic moment when searches for end times and Bible prophecy are going through the roof. Highest numbers on Google, raw numbers on Google in history for some of these searches in March and April and May. And so how do we leverage that? How do we take advantage of that? So with all the fear and anxiety across the country and the stay-at-home orders, how do we reach people and bring them into a close relationship to Jesus and with members of a local church? This was a time that required innovation. Now, I want to be clear, when I say innovation, I'm not talking about just creativity and coming up with new ways of doing things. Innovation is a disciplined process for making both incremental and radical changes to different stages in a process. So there's two different ways of looking at evangelism. There's two major methods that are used for reaching people in Adventist evangelism. One is through lead generation or interest generation. These are Bible study cards mailings or social media campaigns. And the other is through evangelistic events like bridge events or reaping events, the traditional evangelistic series. The evangelistic pyramid is something that I first heard about from Dr. Roger Walter. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the evangelism bridge, the evangelism pyramid. If this is something that you're not familiar with, I encourage you to just Google SermonView Evangelism Pyramid, and you'll find an article there on our website on evangelismmarketing.com that goes into detail about what each of these levels are. We have had some success with sowing activities, particularly with our interest generator program. The innovation project that we've been working on, that we've really been putting effort into innovating, have to do with evangelistic events and how do we do those in an online environment. So we focused our efforts on bridge events and reaping events and how those can translate into an online environment. Now, as part of this innovation process, we broke down evangelistic events into 7 key ingredients in order for us to be able to look at how do we adapt this for an era of social distancing? How do we adapt this for online meetings? So I'm going to send this over to Vince to go through the 7 ingredients of effective evangelism and what we did, the questions we asked, and how we applied the innovation process to this specific problem.
Thanks. Yeah, so as we were looking at this, we knew the problem was daunting. Obviously, we're all living through something that's a little bit different than we've ever been through before. And so one of the principles that helps us to move fast through the innovation cycle is that we believe in effectiveness over innovation. And what that led us to do was to figure out what was going to continue to be effective, that we didn't need to innovate, so that we could put our creativity and our energy towards those pieces that did need to be innovated. So as we looked through that, we came up with these 7 ingredients for effective evangelism that we used as the model as we tried to solve the problem of what to do with online events. So let's just take a look. The first one that we knew we had to address was content. And so content, really, we had to ask certain questions about content in relationship to this online environment. So we asked questions like, how does content need to change for online meetings? That's an obvious one. What type of content drives action? Because we need people to take an action step here. We need them to engage with this content. What type of content is going to drive those actions and those engagements? And how do we keep content relevant in a fast-paced changing kind of environment? A lot of times when you're doing an in-person evangelistic meeting, you just have to kind of add a little bit of relevance and then really kind of focus in on the major message. But when you're online and you can lose people a lot easier, they can close the laptop or they can walk away. How do you maintain content that's relevant in that situation? And then how important is perceived quality in engaging viewers? We knew that we had to ask this question because it's easy to get caught up in production value. It's easy to get caught up and lost in it's overwhelming to get something out because it has to reach a certain mark. We knew there was a line in there of good enough that wasn't going to hinder the message or hinder the activity, but at the same time maintain enough quality that it had integrity and trust. So those are the questions we brought into this first paradigm of content. So what came out of that? These are the answers that were formed from our team. First of all, content needs to be shorter and more relevant. So we realized that when you're in an online environment, that you do have time limitations, you have attention span issues, and so you need to have shorter content in general, and that it needs to be very relevant. It needs to engage people at a very now level, because again, the amount of friction it takes to walk away. If you're in the sanctuary somewhere, getting up and just walking out is a lot more friction and a lot more work than it is just to close your laptop or walk into another room. So we knew we had to meet that there. The content needs to stay focused on the state of the world and the sign of the times. We were trying to figure out what content was going to work. And what we realized was that much of the existing content that is already out there regarding evangelism and prophecy was in line with where people were at based on those Google searches that Larry was talking about, based on the fact that we knew that that's where people were focused in this disruption of the world that we were under. Content needs to be unique. People will only go to online content if it's truly an event. They have to know that this is the only place they can get that content. We knew we had to keep it out of the hands of just being available all the time and everywhere. If that was the case, unfortunately, you lose people, because without that urgency that's created by unique events, a lot of times you end up with people who just never take an action. And then 4, the content needs to interact every 10 to 15 minutes. Again, we knew engagement meant that we had to keep it in bursts, and that we had to try and ask or engage people. Where again, if people are sitting at a meeting in a church, they're a little bit more prone to listening. When they're online, they need to be engaged or driven. So that was the first thing. We knew with content, we needed to meet these marks. And so after documenting that, we went on to step 2. Step 2, we started asking ourselves about the delivery method. Now, this is a new one, really. Content's always been a subject that comes up when you're dealing with in-person or online meetings. But the delivery method is really a new question. I mean, the only question we might have had in the day was, are we doing it at the church or at an alternate location? But now suddenly we're having to ask ourselves additional questions. What is the goal of the series, and how does the delivery method aid or hinder those goals? As you guys know, you've worked through this today. We're on Zoom. There's advantages to Zoom. There's disadvantages to Zoom and the way it works. And is it the right methodology for the goals of your particular meeting? We've worked with people that have used YouTube Live or Facebook Live. Those kinds of programs have benefits as well. They go very wide in their delivery method, but sometimes they don't meet the goal. If the goal is connection or engagement, you may not meet those goals through some of those methodologies. So we wanted to keep that in mind as we worked through the solution that we were going to be providing for this fall evangelistic series. Also, what can our team handle technically? I think that's a realistic question you have to ask. What fits for us isn't necessarily a fit for everyone. And in our case, we had to ask it in a broader stroke, because we knew we were going to be handling some of the technical aspects for those churches that we engaged with as we looked at a fall series, and what could we handle technically in that process as well. But I think that's a question every church has to ask and answer and be honest with themselves, so that the tech doesn't become the burden or the breakage. So coming out of that, here's what we realized. The delivery method needs to be protected. And what I mean by that is that, again, we believe that the delivery method, much like the uniqueness, needs to be behind a firewall so that people have to access it and they don't have open access. By giving it to everyone, we feel like sometimes you're giving it to no one. You may get a lot of viewers, but are you getting engagements? Are you getting connections? So we knew that in order to create an event that had some interest and engagement, we needed to put it behind that firewall and not just post it everywhere throughout the whole process. We also knew the delivery method should be considered for both members and non-members. We knew that members have specific needs. I'll give you an example. The chat function in Facebook Live is a really great function for members, because if they haven't seen each other in a while, they want to engage, they want to connect, they want to chat. However, this may not be good for a guest who's coming in. If those chats lead to feeling a little cliquish or use a little too much Adventism or just too many happy Sabbaths or things like that up front, that might be a put off to non-members. So we wanted to make sure that the engagement and the delivery method was really going to work for both members and non-members in the program. And then finally, the delivery method needs to acquire real data and viewer information. There are two camps out there. We're going to say something, Larry?
Go ahead and finish your thought.
Okay. I was just going to say there are two camps out there at this point, and I understand both. Both have a place. One suggests that we want to just get the message out as far as we can. We took this from an approach of connection and engagement and interaction. So we wanted to make sure that the message wasn't just yelled from the top of a mountaintop, but it led to relationship and connection with the local church. And that was important in the paradigm that we were using for innovation.
So I was speaking with somebody, a pretty innovative church leader who actually developed a platform for sharing evangelistic videos. And he's like, Larry, I have a lot of people who have requested access to the videos. He had several hundred people that had requested access to the videos, but literally nobody had watched more than 3 minutes of the videos because they were not behind any kind of firewall. As soon as there's not limited access, the value of that decreases, number one. And number two, people say, well, I can come back to that. And then they never do. So back to your point, Vince, giving it to everybody without any restrictions, a lot of times means giving it to nobody.
Yeah. I think everyone here has experienced a webinar or an event that you knew was pre-recorded and you could watch it whenever you wanted to. And you said, well, I'll get to that. And probably like myself, you never did. It just didn't happen. And so if you know the only way you're going to get that information is to jump in and join at a specific time, you're much more likely to participate at that level. So we evaluated content, we evaluated the delivery method. So then we went to the third ingredient in effective evangelism, and that's interactions. And interactions, again, are something that do happen, but they in in-person meetings, but they're a little more organic in in-person meetings. And we knew we had to ask some good questions to figure out how this applied to online evangelism. So we asked questions like, how do we engage with viewers the way that we engage with live attendees? What could we take from those positive and consistent interactions that were happening in live meetings and bring that to an online environment? And then we realized there may be new ways to engage. I mean, let's not look at this as fixing a broken system. There are advantages to online evangelism that change things. So what are the advantages? Are there new ways to engage with guests and people that you're not getting at an actual live event? And is there something about online meetings that is better for interactions? Kind of that same question, just from a different direction. So as we looked at that, these are the answers that were formed out of our team. We knew that interactions need to be driven by the guests. So it's a different environment when you're online. People are signing up to watch, but not necessarily to participate. People know that if they show up to something, there is a certain level of participation required. If nothing else, there's a certain level of transparency by just being there and being seen. But in these types of environments, that's not necessarily true. So inviting the guests to interact and allowing them to control that gives them a sense of empowerment in those environments and creates a better interaction response. So that's a little different, but think of it as in being put on the spot in an actual church environment. You know, when somebody's new and you say, okay, you stand up, and everyone sits down and everyone stare at that person. That's a very tense moment for somebody sometimes. Some people love it, and then some people really recoil from that kind of an invitation. So forcing people to interact online is just an easy way to get people to shut down or shut that laptop. So we want them to be driving that. Interactions need to create two-way communication. The goal here is not just yes or no's, as much as what can we do to create interactions that actually create connection and relationship, because that's the next level after an online meeting. We'll talk about that more here soon. And then finally, we need to make interacting feel secure and safe in order to protect people. People are protective of themselves online. It's why we limit the amount of information we ask for. It's why, as a marketing team, we have to consider at all times the environment that people are in. Because again, once you have those physical traits, those communication points, trust is built differently in person than it is online. We all know the pitfalls and the tragedies of online interactions and why it's caused some of the security and protection issues that it has. And we have to be sensitive to that as a church and understand that we need to make people feel secure and safe in the process of interacting with them online and not assume that they're just jumping in with the goal of interacting online. Some people will, but plenty of people will not. All right, so the fourth ingredient, and this is an important one in your standard reaping meeting, but already we had to ask this question for in-person meetings as we used the pyramid paradigm for our in-person meetings over the last couple of years before we got to this world. And that is, you know, what decisions are required for a bridge event versus a reaping series. So you've already had to sort of start asking yourself, what am I really trying to get out of this? And what are we trying to get them to give us out of this? And when you look at an online meeting, it changes things a little. So does the format require the same decisions? Are you really asking for the same decisions you would have asked if they went to an in-person version of an evangelistic series? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, but that's a question that does need to be asked in that environment. Can we expect the same decisions in an online environment as well? And then how do we ask for decisions if we're going to be doing that? What is the mechanism that we utilize for that? So out of that, some answers were formed. One, we realized decisions might be a longer cycle. You need to realize that an online meeting is one layer up in the funnel. So if you look at all of this as an engagement funnel, then online meetings are one step up from an in-person attendance to an actual meeting. Doesn't mean that there's no value in it, because that funnel is also wider. It means you get to reach more people, and it's better in some ways, but you need to realize that decision-making might be a longer cycle. So you can't go quite as quickly through that process. We need to preference permission and connection over decision. And I think this was the big takeaway from our meetings as we talked about this. We realized that we needed to preference, again, them doing what we call permission-based marketing. When somebody on the other side of that screen engages you and says, please call me, please contact me, please talk to me, that is as good as it gets. They are asking for connection and relationship. That is more important than somebody just saying yes on a form or something of that nature. Because if you call them off of that yes, they may not be prepared to talk to you about it. Giving you a yes is different than giving you permission to engage with them and have a conversation on that particular subject as well. All right, so then we went into the fifth ingredient. This is an important one, and where, of course, our team focuses a lot of our energy and time, and that's the marketing side. How is marketing changed for online meetings? So we ask questions like, how does marketing need to change for online meetings? How does a ministry funnel look like or what does a ministry funnel look like on online versus an in-person meeting? Again, we're looking at that funnel all the time. It's how we think. Are people moving from one area to the next area to the next area as they're digging in, building deeper relationship, building deeper connection, and finally joining a local church and going through baptism? So 3, what are the metrics we can use for online meetings? We want to know how to measure what it is that we're trying to accomplish and what can we look at there. So these are the answers that formed out of our team's meeting there. We knew that marketing needed to match the method, and that just means that we're doing an online event. It means that a substantial amount of your energy and budget needs to go to online marketing. So where before online marketing might be supplemental for an in-person meeting, you might put 70% into physical products and 30% into supplemental online. You would reverse that for an online meeting where 70% of your energy goes to online forms of invitation. 30% is print and other methodologies to back that up and build on that as well. Online marketing is a longer funnel. We're going to be reaching them at a different point of friction because, again, the action of walking through the doors of a local church or even a third-party building is still substantially stronger, and it takes more to get them to do that than it does for them to just sign up and receive a link and potentially join a meeting where they're not going to be seen and they can drop the lid down. And that's a good example of where you want to think through all of these pieces. If you're doing a Zoom meeting and everyone has to be on camera, that's going to be a different level of friction and potentially challenge for somebody who's registering than somebody who's in a webinar environment where they're just watching. So letting them know what to expect up front, that goes back to the delivery method and what you choose there as well. Again, online marketing is lower friction. And so we need to understand what that means for the numbers. And what I mean by that is there is a satisfaction curve in the numbers that we've witnessed and we've seen. And what happens is, like with online meetings, the advertising is substantially stronger and actually goes out a lot wider, and you get a lot more registration. However, the next level of people that view a meeting are going to be less, and the next level below that are going to be less. I can tell you that we've looked at the numbers. It is actually a lower cost to engage somebody with an online meeting and get them all the way to the point of engaging with you than it is for an in-person meeting. But here's the distinct difference. You're going to have a larger amount of people that are no-shows. You're going to have a larger amount of people you have to engage at a second tier with an online meeting. So much so that you may have 40 or 50 people. So, and this can be bothersome for a church that really expects everyone that registers is going to come through that. We as a marketing team are very comfortable and familiar with only 3 and 5 and 10% conversion rates. But as a church, that's uncomfortable because typically you only really know about the people that showed up. So you feel good about those numbers. So we need to kind of step back and realize this is how online marketing works. And we do need to make sure to connect with those no-shows as well. If they gave you real information, then they really wanted to engage with this on some level. Something may have changed, or we may have to reach them a different way, but they didn't give you real information on a lark. They did it because they believed that there was something of value in what it was that we were offering. Okay, so let's get to attendance. We want to get through these really quickly because I do want to show you how all this was applied. We're going to talk about how you manage attendance. Obviously, there's multiple ways to do that for in-person meetings, but with online, we had to say, how do we manage online attendance? And is it something that'll work as we transition back to in-person and online? We've already done a lot of in-person online meetings with that combination platter, and we wanted to make sure that we were asking the right question. What metrics are important for monitoring attendance in an online meeting versus an in-person meeting? Since this is digital, are there advantages to this new form of attendance tracking that would show themselves? And so with those questions, here's the answers to form. We needed a solution, again, that worked for online and person. We did see up ahead that we were going to have more of these. In fact, I believe even if the environment goes back to where it was, I don't believe we'll ever truly go back to that. And online meetings are going to have their place in the evangelism cycle for here and into the future. So we needed to handle that. This is an important one. Metrics for ministry are different than standard marketing metrics for videos. I've talked to a lot of churches that have said, well, I want to know how long somebody watches my video. I can tell you why that's actually not a good metric. In fact, we saw that with Forecasting Hope. Forecasting Hope had about a 10-minute lag at the end of the video that was nothing. And then it would shut off and that would finally kill the feed. We actually watched the metric for that. And when we watched the metric for that, we realized that there was a certain percentage, about 6%, that were staying to the very end. Well, that didn't tell us who watched the video the longest. That told us who wasn't paying attention. Because if they went through the 10 minutes of nothing happening all the way to the end, then they didn't shut it down at the right time. They weren't paying any attention. They were probably doing laundry in another room. That may not be the best indicator of who's really gathering this information and engaging with it. Engagements are more important than view times. You don't care about how long somebody watched because you don't know if they watched or they went and got a snack or they walked out of the room and left the video running. I've watched plenty of webinars that I've never really watched because I turned them on and walked out of the room and had a conversation with somebody. But if you have levels of engagement and interaction with them, if they're engaging and interacting, you know that they're watching the video and that they're chiming in at the correct moments and times. We also realized we are not forming physical habits, so we need to add habits to build attendance. What I mean by that is when somebody comes to a meeting, again, there's a lot of friction, and them coming to a meeting, driving there, all of those steps create a certain amount of connection to the meeting. And if they do that habit once or twice, then they're going to feel more connected. However, unfortunately, with online meetings, doing that once or twice doesn't build the same level of mental habitual behavior that going to a physical meeting does. And so you have to do other things or to communicate with them throughout the process and ask for engagement so that they can build those habits. You know, please read this, watch this. Here's something to check out before the event. There's extra points of communication involved in building a habit of attendance that don't exist in physical meetings. And finally, follow up. We knew that we had to have something at the end of every meeting. So we asked, what's the next level of the funnel after an online meeting? And how does follow-up change for online meetings? And how do we communicate with leads in an ongoing fashion? So the answers that formed out of that, follow-up needs to drive closeness over information. We weren't necessarily following up with them to engage with more information. We wanted that follow-up to be, how do we get them closer to us? How does the next thing lead to connection and relationship? We knew that was important instead of just, pummeling them with more information as the follow-up to a meeting that already had a lot of information. Outreach and community is a form of follow-up, meaning that now what we're asking for is, what else do they need? So again, we're trying to build relationships. So it might be that we have to come to them. It might be that we're asking them to engage in community or other types of activities. Again, it's not necessarily just an informational follow-up after that. And then we want to ask for permission. We want them to let us know they want to follow up and ask for permission. So those are the 7 ingredients that we looked at, we utilized for this innovation cycle, and we put together. Now, the question is, what did that lead to at the end of this? And of course, we're going to demo that. But as it was mentioned in the description for this meeting, what that led us to was Forecasting Hope. And Forecasting Hope was an event that we used. So let's go down the list. Content, we realized we needed to partner. We are not a content institution. That's not good for us. We partnered with the information from Evangelist David Klinedinst. He's over at Chesapeake Conference. So we partnered with Chesapeake Conference and their church growth director, David Klinedinst, on this event. We also came to the idea that this was going to look a little bit more like an old net series, but under the new paradigm of an online meeting. So there's some bonuses to the modern technology we were going to apply, but we wanted it to have a little bit of that feel where each church had personal connection, but the content was coming from a centralized source so that we could keep the professionalism and the quality high and controlled throughout the process. The delivery mechanism, we decided we were going to go with pre-recorded, but streamed live. Why? Well, looking back at those delivery pieces, we knew that it had to have a certain level of urgency and uniqueness. Live events create that uniqueness. However, pre-recorded creates quality. So we pre-recorded the event, but streamed it as if it was live. And that gave us those interactions that those unique pieces we were looking for. Interaction. Here we knew we had to innovate. There was no system out there in current existing things that really created the level of interactions we wanted while meeting some of the other marks. We wanted people to be able to interact in a permission-based way and not just force them to interact as you would maybe in a Zoom meeting or something else. So we had to invent. We invented something called the interactive video module, which we'll be talking about here in a second. Decisions. We knew we needed to be able to collect some kind of decisions, and we needed a place for them. We already had an existing interest tracking software called InterestTracker, so we made sure that we were utilizing the decision system built into that, so you had a central hub for all the decisions you were going to make. Marketing, again, we targeted Facebook and Google marketing for our online presence substantially. We did do some mailing for some churches and some other things, but we found that the bulk of all registrations and viewership came from our online engagements. Attendance, we had a basic module called InterestTracker that was developed for in-person meetings. We had to innovate and build onto that. And now that system is available for you guys as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then follow-up, we needed some kind of permission to follow up with them. So we wanted to make sure that we had their contact information and we had everything we needed to create that. And so what was born out of that was Forecasting Hope, which was released, I believe, October 9th in conjunction with Chesapeake Conference, and was an event handled all across the NAD. Any church could participate in. So how did Forecasting Hope work, and how did it meet all of those different steps? For that, I want to do a demo with you guys. So I am going to do a new share here, and I'm going to move us over to a different screen. All right. Larry, you can nod. Can we see the my demo Facebook page? Great. All right. So what I want to do is I want to talk to you guys a little bit about InterestTracker in its original form. First of all, InterestTracker is interest tracking software designed specifically for Adventist churches to manage interests, and it is absolutely 100% free to any church within the North American division. So you can go on to InterestTracker.org. You can learn more about this software. We do have, as Edgar mentioned, he said, I think 600 plus, we're now over 700 plus. It's growing very quickly. And this stuff is really, really robust. It is fully cloud-based, unlimited users, so you can engage all of your team, your evangelism team in that process and make sure they're engaging with it. One of the great things about InterestTracker, though, is that we've developed ways that we can import or bring in those engagements. We have two methodologies for that. The first methodology is, as Larry mentioned earlier, Interest Generator, which Interest Generator is a tool for bringing in Bible study interests. Those go automatically in. But in this case, we wanted a way to do that with our registrations. And so I want to walk you guys through that process and show you what that looks like. So if you signed up on InterestTracker.org, you would then have an InterestTracker account. This is the back end of an InterestTracker account. This is our made-up pastor. His name is Harold Bleckman. He is at our lovely made-up church, Prairie Community Adventist Church. And this is his InterestTracker profile. He has 1,034 interests in InterestTracker. And I'm going to go in, and we're not going to go too deep into InterestTracker. If you want to know more about it, we have training videos, an entire training library available on InterestTracker.org with some very robust videos, including an introduction and then individual pieces as well. We also have an entire help section, and you can request a one-on-one where we will train you and your team on InterestTracker. So what I want to show you right now is in InterestTracker, you have these basic list of all of your interests. And these are people that you've reached out to in numerous ways. And a lot of that we use tags to see who and where we've reached out to them as well. So in this particular instance, though, I want to show you how Forecasting Hope works. And I want to show you that we don't have events in this InterestTracker account. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to a demo page. This is just a faux page that I created for this demo, kind of showcasing what a Facebook page might look like for somebody. Apparently somebody's having a birthday I should know about. But here I am walking down my list and I see an ad. Now, you'll notice that when we do ads for churches, we use a profile called Relevant Seminars. It's a profile we've developed over the last 4 or 5 years. And this profile creates a level of separation between you and your guests, which is really important, because if you were to use your own church profile, they're going to get lost in the muck of what your church is doing, who they are, and how their Facebook page looks. You don't have to worry about any of that. We've developed Relevant Seminars specifically to be an agency that is focused on spreading the gospel throughout the NAD or throughout the US and Canada. And so that profile is already built in. But here's an ad. Of course, we run lots of ads. Every ad campaign gets a marketing coordinator where they test and work on ads for maximum efficiency. But here we go, relevantseminars.org, Forecasting Hope, it's coming up. So we click on that, and it's going to take us to a Forecasting Hope registration page. We have the capacity to build independent registration pages for every church participating in one of these large-scale events. We had 100 churches plus participating in the Forecasting Hope series. And with that, we were able to build an independent page for them that is custom to their InterestTracker account and tied to that. So from this page, there's things you can do. You can look at the schedule. There's an entire sharing area that you can engage your members in, where they can post it on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. They can do email invitations. There's a number of things that they can do. But in this case, we're just going to register, and I'm going to register myself here. I have done a number of these, so I'm going to come up with a new one that hasn't been done, just so I don't break anything in the system. And then I am going to, I'm not going to put in my phone number right now. I'm just going to put in another number, but just know that if you put in a phone number and you put send confirmation to phone, it creates an SMS chain between that person and our notification system. In this case, we're also requiring zip code. Notice we don't require address. We don't require that because at this stage, that's a point of friction that wouldn't make sense for an online meeting. They don't need us to know where they are. We'll get that from them later. How did you hear about us? This is an editable field. In this case, these are the options we had. Let's assume I heard about it from Facebook. And now all I'm doing is protecting the list. I'm not a robot, and let's register. So by registering, immediately goes to a congratulations message. And that congratulations message allows me also to share immediately on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Gives us some details here, and also gives us an online seminar check-in link, which we're going to talk about shortly. We'll leave this page up for that. But meanwhile, I want to go back to the InterestTracker account, and I want to refresh the page. So what we've already built in is the ability for that person who registers to now come straight into the system. So right here in this query that's connected to that registration page, we have access to that information: phone number, email, first and last name for Vince Williams. So that person is now in our system automatically. We can assign them to somebody on the team, and assigned people get notifications throughout the entire process. Also, tags can be applied. Now, typically we apply tags right from the website, telling you where they came from. In this particular instance, it's a demo account. It does not have any tags attached. If we go into the system, we can see that there's some other things in here that were designed for you to interact with your person. So we can see that it was added right from the pre-registration system. You know how they came in. You have access to their immediate data. If you're using a mobile application, you can click the phone number and it will call them. You can click email, it will open your own email client at that point in the process. And then go down here, we have interactions, we have follow-up, and we have offer requests that you have access to, which we'll show you in just a second. And then we have the events in InterestTracker. Now notice there are, I'm sorry, in attendance tracking, there are multiple events in here. We're utilizing this first event right here for Forecasting Hope. So now let's go in and let's talk about how the check-in process works. So when you go in to InterestTracker, we created an event already in the system. And so this is the event. The dates are a little askew because we changed some. So I have some for now, I have some for previous. We already have some guests checked in. How did that happen? Well, you could check them in physically, but this was an online meeting. So they would check in through notifications or from their email or reminder on the screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that right now. Now, right away, it already knows what meeting is coming up. So it knows Bible Prophecy and the Signs of the Times, November 4 at 4 p.m. Why does it know that? Because it finds the next meeting in the list that makes sense. So 11-2 meeting's already expired. We know we're going to the 11-4 meeting. And so it's going to check us into that meeting. So when we check into that meeting, it's going to allow us to check in automatically. We can join the event, or we can check someone else in if we have someone else in our household that we want to check in. But in this instance, we're going to go ahead and join the event. So it's going to take us right in to our IVM, which is our Internet Video Module. Now I'm going to pause this for a second, and we're going to go back, and we're going to look at that interest again. So we're going to go find Vince. And he's going to show up right here, and we're going to view him. And you'll see it's now tagged us with FH attendee. That means that we've attended Forecasting Hope. And you can also see here, Forecasting Hope. I just checked into night 7. This is our system for that, the dashes, and then the numbers tell us when. You can also log in right here, and you can kind of see what's going on in the process. It's actually night 17, sorry, not night 7. After 10, it goes back around in the numbers. So we can see I'm checked into night 17. On Attendance Tracker, you can also look at the entire attendance list. This is for everybody that attended these meetings. We have all kinds of names and people in here. You can see the nights that they attended. And then you can filter by meetings. In this case, I just want to know who was present for night 17. And in this case, turns out everybody was. Or I could look and say, well, who was absent for night maybe 3? And in this case, that's almost everybody again. So you can filter down. Now, there's a lot of things you can do with InterestTracker to communicate with people, but we're just going to use this right now. Now, let's come back to that paradigm we had. We had to interact with people. What does that look like? And this is where we did a lot of innovating. And this was Larry's team over in the development department that did this. Pretty strong stuff. Actually knows who's checked in. You can see it's Vince Williams checked in here, and we're watching, again, pre-recorded, but it shows it's live. It feels live throughout the process. I'm going to pause it again. And now David could tell people, hey, if we want you to interact tonight, we would like you to make a comment or question. So maybe you say, it's Bible Prophecy and the Signs of the Times. Where are we at in Bible Prophecy? That's my question. And now I want to send this comment on. Now the question is, who gets this? Oh.
I don't know why it came back. It showed an undefined error there.
Yeah, I have two screens open. I'm wondering if I created a problem there. Let's try that again. How are you? Let's just try that. There we go. I had two screens open. That made it very confusing. That will not happen to anyone else. That only happens to demo Vince. All right, so let's look in here. Okay, you can see an event attendee said, Vince Williams said, response during online meeting, how are you? So now you have an interaction directly in your own InterestTracker account, and you can engage with that person and respond back. How do you respond? You could respond by email. You could, of course, respond by call. And we also have a text message service that is an additional cost. There is a charge for the text message, but we're covering the cost of all of that for the flat fee. And you can text them back in the process. All right. Also, you could request prayer. I need prayer for my family. And now if we request prayer, that's going to show up, and it's also going to create a follow-up. And that follow-up is going to send a notification to somebody on your team that you've assigned to Vince Williams. So now suddenly you know they need prayer. You have an opportunity. This is permission-based marketing. This is as good as it gets online. You can call them and say, I saw your prayer request. I want you to know that we're going to be praying for you during this process. So you can do that. And then request Bible studies works similarly and adds an offer request. You can also do book offers or other engagements. But the point is, we created a system for people to watch a video and interact and for it to come right back through the process. So that's InterestTracker, that's Attendance Tracker, and that's how it all worked for Forecasting Hope. So now let's take a look at kind of how Forecasting Hope worked. This is the innovation cycle. We built some innovations. We went through the module. Then we built this for Forecasting Hope. Larry, let me pull this back up on the screen here. And then let's look at, let's see here. Where is the screen so that I can?
Yeah, well, let me just start going through this.
Why don't you go through the numbers there, and I'll try and.
Yeah, we're running out of time here. So final numbers that we had for Forecasting Hope, because you couldn't watch this unless you checked in through this system, we know how many people checked in. So on opening night, we actually had 1,727 viewers that checked in on opening night. But more than that, in order to check in, you actually had to give us some information. And so we ended up with almost 9,000 leads or interests above and beyond, in total, that churches then have an opportunity to be able to follow up with them. Somebody doesn't give you their information unless they were truly interested in it. And if they were truly interested in it, you can follow up and say, hey, wasn't sure if you were able to get into the meeting. I'd like to, give you another opportunity to get this information or whatever. Over the course of 19 meetings, over the course of the month, we had 4,555 unique attendees. These are unique people that checked in for one or more programs. And through the process, we ended up with 3,255 interactions. These are people that requested an interaction in one way or another through the system. And we had over 1,500 book requests, 3 different nights out of the 19 nights, 3 different times. David offered a book, and so we had over 1,500 book requests.
Yeah, and this is that permission-based marketing where nobody's going to be offended when you deliver it, when you drop it off, or when you call them, because they've asked you to do that. And that's as good as it gets in these online meeting environments. Okay.
All right, we've got about 5 minutes left. It's not much time, but here's some time for questions. If anybody has any questions for what they've heard so far.
So hello, everyone. Thank you, Larry and Vince. And this is a good time now for you to feel free to type your questions, and let me get a question started that it's been in my mind right now for you guys, and that is, what do you do to engage with a local pastor to create a more personalized marketing campaign?
So regarding if they're using local content or just in general?
Kind of like in a local context, yes.
So if they have local content themselves, all of these same systems and methodologies work. We can work with a local church to create an environment that feels just as big, unique, and get those same kind of response rates in a local community. All of our systems are scaled in a way so they're designed to highlight the uniqueness of the event. So if it's a local pastor, it's going to highlight them through the process and talk about them. So really, we do want to start handing off as quickly as we can some of the details of that local church, to guests and viewers through that process so they can engage. So I'm a huge fan of local churches running that kind of local content. But we heard from a lot of churches, the reason we did this sort of national content was because a lot of churches are intimidated to think through all the pieces we thought through about the meeting links and how to create the interactions and do all that. But all of our systems scale all the way up to a national level, all the way down to the local church.
Thanks. And I have a question here is like, what kind of a computer knowledge a person needs to have to work with your system?
Well, the good news is that almost all of it is handled on our side. We really took seriously the role that we had in this process. And so, as you can see, all of the data movement from registration to notifications, all that is handled on our side at this stage. So really, you need to have a basic understanding of just being able to get in the InterestTracker and how to utilize it. Again, we offer private instruction, we have videos, and we have an entire help area. So we have quite a few tools for that for everybody involved. And then it comes down to the content that you want to provide. So there is a technical aspect to that. That's why we're trying to work with different providers to provide content. If that's a source that a local church needs, if they don't have access to really sending out videos in that way, streaming them as well. We don't handle that portion unless we're handling it in a broader context. So a church would just need to understand streaming. Luckily for all of us, we've been tolerating and working with streaming now for the last few months. And for many churches, they have a person or persons that are getting more and more familiar with that process. But once they have that, we do the rest.
Here's another kind of a question that follows that up a little bit. Is like, what's the best way to use this system now during the pandemic?
Well, I think really, again, the beauty of it is the goal here is to get people into the system and then get your members to whoever you have. You can have basic members in InterestTracker. They can be notified when people are engaging. You want to take advantage of that permission-based marketing. So the best way to do this is find ways to get people to ask you to contact them, whether that's prayer, whether that's a book request or offer. Again, we have sewing programs like Interest Generator where people request Bible studies. You want to be working from a place where people say, I want to talk to you and I want to communicate with you. You don't want to try and force yourself on people in a way that maybe wasn't forcing, but it's very organic in a church, but in an online environment doesn't really work as well. And so we're going to continue over the next quarter to develop some tools for that as well. Hopefully some forums and some ways for you guys to be able to communicate with each other, to find the best methods of communication in an online environment. What we found so far, phone, text, email in that order have the highest success rates after someone asks you to communicate with them.
Fantastic. Hey, we're running very close to our closing time. I just want to maybe allow you and Larry maybe to have some closing remarks and maybe what's next? What are you guys working on next? And maybe some closing thoughts, and maybe Larry, if you want to, or Vince, you want to close us with a word of prayer. Yeah. And then I have a very important announcement to make.
Great. Larry, you're the developer. Tell us what's coming next.
Yeah, man. The biggest thing is we want to be able to take the interactive video module and be able to apply that with your content. So if you're going to be doing your own series, to be able to use that same interactive video module, that's really the biggest thing. We're working on some improvements to our notification system. But look, here's the bottom line. We do this because we love the local church. We love pastors. We love serving people who have been called by God to get out into their community and really to share the good news, to introduce people to Jesus and to his last day church. That's why we do this. So it's been a privilege for Vince and me to be able to spend a few minutes with you as a pastor, as a leader in your local church. And I just want to pray with you as we conclude. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to be able to spend a few minutes connecting. And Lord, I just want to lift up every pastor, every spouse, every marriage, every home, and every church that's represented here on this call. Lord, I pray that you will offer your protection to every marriage that's represented here. And that you will work through us to propel your message forward. Lord, it's your church. Please bless us. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.